The first time I met Marcus Chen, he was telling me that my infrastructure assessment of downtown Seattle's aging water system was dangerously optimistic and that I was going to cause a public health catastrophe if I didn't completely revise my maintenance recommendations. My name is David Reeves. I'm 29 years old, and I'm the lead infrastructure engineer for the City of Seattle's Department of Utilities. I've spent the last 6 years maintaining the complex system of pipes, pumps, and treatment facilities that deliver safe water to 750,000 people. I understand load capacity, material degradation, pressure management. I know Seattle's water system inside and out. What I apparently don't understand is how wrong I can be. Marcus Chen, 31, is the director of Seattle's Crisis Management and Disaster Preparedness Division. He spent 8 years building contingency protocols, studying failure scenarios, and preparing for the disasters that every city hopes never happen. He's brilliant, intense, and apparently convinced that my maintenance schedules are inadequate to prevent a catastrophic water system failure. Your Consolidated Concrete Pipe sections in the Columbia Hill District are over 90 years old, he said, sitting across from me in my office at the Water Department building, holding a structural assessment report that I'd personally prepared. 90 years. These pipes have reached the end of their service life. Your recommendation is to continue monitoring them until they fail. Do you understand what until they fail means? It means a rupture that could contaminate 80,000 people's water supply with sewage backup. It means boil water orders affecting an entire district. It means public health emergency. The pipes are still functioning, I replied, reviewing the structural data I knew by heart. The pressure tests show no critical degradation. The concrete hasn't shown significant corrosion. We monitor continuously. When failure indicators appear, we replace them. When failure indicators appear, it's too late. Marcus was controlling his frustration with visible effort. By the time you see structural failure in pipes that old, the failure is already catastrophic. You're waiting for the disaster to happen instead of preventing it. Replacing 47 miles of water main in an urban district costs $850 million, I said, meeting his intensity. The city doesn't have that budget. We do what we can with the resources we have. Then you advocate for the resources instead of accepting inadequate infrastructure. He set down the assessment report. Because when those pipes fail, and they will fail, it's not going to be a quiet engineering problem. It's going to be a public health crisis, a financial disaster, and a failure of municipal responsibility. And I will have to manage the crisis response. He stood up to leave, and I almost let him go. But something in the certainty of his prediction made me look at him more carefully. Marcus Chen wasn't being difficult. He was being prophetic. When do you think it will fail? I asked. The pipes? He looked back at me. If we're lucky, 18 months. If we're unlucky, 6 months. The deterioration is accelerating. The spring water surge is coming in 2 months. And the pressure surge during seasonal runoff will accelerate the failure. Timeline. So I have 6 months. You have 6 months to either replace the pipes or prepare for crisis. Management. He met my eyes directly. I'm hoping you choose replacement. But I'm preparing for crisis management either way. For months later, the first rupture Eve call came through at 04:00 hours on a Tuesday morning in May. A water main rupture in the Columbia Hill District. The Consolidated Concrete Pipe section that I'd assessed as still functioning had cracked catastrophically. Water was flooding into a residential neighborhood at 800 gallons per minute. The street had collapsed. 3 buildings were damaged, and raw sewage from the parallel sanitary line was mixing with the flooding by 05:30. I was at the Emergency Operations Center with Marcus, watching real-time status reports coming from field crews. We have a boil water order covering 47,000 people, Marcus was saying, coordinating with the health department and mayor's office. We're activating bottled water distribution at 6 locations. We're calling in the National Guard for traffic management around the collapse zone. I was staring at the video feed from the rupture site. The pipe I'd said was still functioning was broken into pieces. The concrete had crumbled. The failure was catastrophic and complete. This is the beginning, I said quietly. Marcus looked at me. What? This is the first section to fail. But if the Columbia Hill section has deteriorated this far, the other sections are at similar degradation levels. We're going to have cascading failures across the whole district. This isn't one rupture. This is a systemic failure of the aging pipe infrastructure. How long? Marcus asked, and I heard the gravity in his voice. He'd been preparing for this. 2 weeks, maybe 3. The pressure surge from the first rupture will create stress on adjacent sections. The seasonal water flow increase is happening now. The pipes can't handle the pressure. Then we need to reduce demand, Marcus said immediately. We issue water conservation mandates. We reduce industrial usage. We lower system pressure across the entire district. That requires declaring a water emergency for the whole city. Yes, he met my eyes, which is what's about to happen anyway when the other pipes start failing. I'm just choosing to declare it strategically before we have complete system collapse. The emergency declaration our 6 Marcus stood in front of the media, with the mayor beside him, and declared a water emergency for Seattle. Immediate mandatory water conservation. Industrial water usage reduced to 40%. Irrigation banned. Public fountains shut down. The city was going on water emergency protocols. The news media was furious. Residents were confused. The business community was angry. But I understood what Marcus was doing by reducing system pressure through conservation. We were buying time. We were preventing cascading failures by lowering the pressure. That was going to destroy the aging pipes. This is going to buy us for weeks, I told Marcus. Studying the hydraulic models. After 4 weeks, the conservation measures stopped being effective. The seasonal water demand will override the reduction. We'll be back to crisis conditions. Then we use those for weeks to replace as many pipe sections as possible, Marcus said. We get contractors mobilized. We get federal emergency funding. We do everything we can to replace the infrastructure before the next cascade of failures. Asterisk for weeks of emergency operations. The next 4 weeks were the most intense period of my professional career. I coordinated with contractors, secured emergency funding from federal disaster relief, identified which pipe sections were most critical to replace, and managed the logistics of ripping up streets in an urban district. While trying to maintain water service, Marcus coordinated with multiple city departments, managed media communications, handled public concerns, and prepared contingency plans for the cascading failures that were inevitable. If we couldn't replace enough pipe sections, we worked in the same emergency operations center, sometimes for 16-hour stretches. We coordinated through crisis after crisis. A second pipe rupture on Capitol Hill expected. A third rupture in Wallingford unexpected. The partial collapse of a city block when the street structure failed. Predictable given pipe failure. And the increasing public pressure for the city to do something about the water emergency. We've replaced 12 miles of piping for weeks, Marcus said. On day 28, looking at the progress maps, which is 25% of what needs to be replaced. We need more funding, I replied. We need federal emergency declaration status to unlock additional resources. I'm working on that. He looked exhausted. The mayor is lobbying the state and federal level. But funding takes time, and we're running out of time. We have 6 days, I said, studying the hydraulic models. In 6 days, the seasonal water surge is going to overwhelm the conservation measures. If we haven't reduced enough pressure load by then, the remaining aging pipes are going to start failing. Day 30 for the decision. Federal emergency declaration came through on day 34. $200 million in emergency funding was released. Additional contractors were mobilized. And Marcus made a decision that was going to change everything. We're going to do a controlled pressure reduction, he said, standing in the emergency operations center with me and the city director of utilities. We're going to temporarily shut down the secondary water treatment facility and route all water through the primary system, which we've recently replaced with new pipes. This will reduce overall system pressure and buy us additional time. That means 750,000 people on a single treatment facility, I said. If that facility fails, the entire city loses water. I know, Marcus met my eyes. But if we don't reduce pressure on the aging infrastructure now, we're going to have simultaneous failures across multiple districts. This is choosing a controlled risk over an uncontrolled catastrophe. This is your crisis management training. I said, yes. This is what I trained 8 years to do, make decisions that minimize catastrophe even when the options are all bad. We implemented the controlled pressure reduction at 03:00 hours. Demand dropped immediately. System pressure decreased. The aging pipes, stressed beyond their limits, stopped failing temporarily. We had 6 more days. 6 more days to replace as much pipe as possible before the seasonal water surge would overwhelm even the reduced pressure system. 6 days of continuous operations for 6 days. Contractors worked round the clock. Streets were ripped up. Old pipes were replaced with new pipe. Water service was maintained by careful coordination and hydraulic management. Marcus managed the public communication, keeping people informed without creating panic. I managed the technical operations, coordinating contractors, monitoring system pressure, identifying which sections were most critical to replace. On day 39, federal emergency resources arrived. The National Guard was mobilized. Additional crews from neighboring municipalities came to help. The pace of replacement accelerated. On day 42, the seasonal water surge began. System pressure increased. The newly replaced pipes handled the pressure perfectly. The remaining aging pipes held, because Marcus's controlled pressure reduction had kept them from failing. By day 45, we'd replaced 34 miles of pipe. 2/3 of the critical infrastructure had been upgraded. The crisis wasn't over, but it was managed. It was controlled. It wasn't a catastrophe. You were right, I said to Marcus. In the Emergency Operations Center at 06:00 hours on day 45, when the crisis was declared officially over, you warned me. You prepared for this. You managed it exactly as you said you would. You were partially right too, Marcus replied. The pipes did fail exactly when I predicted, but you managed the technical response perfectly. You coordinated contractors. You made engineering decisions under pressure. You prevented the failures from becoming complete collapse. We did this together. Yeah, he looked at me directly. We did. The aftermath 2 weeks later, the water emergency was officially declared over on day 58. The city was back to normal water usage. The temporary pressure reduction protocols were lifted, and the first phase of pipe replacement was complete. The city council held a press conference commending Marcus and me for our work during the emergency. The media called it a crisis management success story. Federal auditors praised the decision-making process, but what nobody was talking about except Marcus and me was the moment during the crisis when I'd realized I'd been wrong about the infrastructure, and he'd been right, and I'd had to trust his judgment completely while we were managing a public health emergency. I fell in love with you somewhere around day 20 of the crisis, Marcus said. In my apartment overlooking Seattle, 2 weeks after the emergency was declared over, I watched you making decisions under pressure. I watched you accepting criticism and adapting your engineering based on real-time data. I watched you trust me when everything was uncertain. I fell in love with you before the crisis even started, I replied. I just didn't recognize it until you were coordinating 750,000 people's water supply, while I was managing infrastructure that was failing. I love you for being prepared. I love you for knowing what was coming. I love you for believing I could handle it. After 6 months later, the comprehensive pipe replacement program was well underway. Phase 2 was funded. Phase 3 was in planning. Seattle's aging water infrastructure was being systematically replaced with modern systems. Designed to last 100 years, Marcus was still Director of Crisis Management, but now he was working in partnership with the Utilities Department on infrastructure resilience planning. I was still lead engineer, but now my recommendations included crisis scenarios based on Marcus's disaster preparedness expertise. We're making better engineering decisions because we're considering crisis management implications, I said, looking at the updated pipe replacement schedule. And you're making better crisis management decisions because you're considering engineering capabilities. That's what collaboration looks like. Marcus agreed. When you stop defending your position and start listening to the other person's expertise. I should have listened to you for months ago. You were defending your budget and your professional judgment. I was defending public safety. We were both right about our domains. We just needed to work together to find the solution that honored both. On the wall of my office, I had the structural assessment report that Marcus had challenged. The report I'd said was correct. The pipes I'd said were still functioning. The assessment that had been dangerously optimistic. Next to it, I hung a new report, the revised assessment incorporating crisis management scenarios, infrastructure degradation projections, and the recommendation for aggressive pipe replacement. This assessment was written by both of us. It reflected both engineering precision and crisis preparation. This is the best work we've ever done, I said, showing the updated assessment to Marcus. Because we did it together, he replied. Because you listened when someone challenged your judgment. Because I learned to respect the complexity of engineering decisions. Because we stopped being defensive and started being collaborative. He pulled me close, and we stood together looking out at Seattle, a city where the water system was being renewed, where aging infrastructure was being replaced, where crisis management and engineering expertise had merged to create something better than either could have done alone.